Thank you. Yeah. So thanks, guys. My name is Dan Devias. I'm the CEO of Current. Outside of what Dave was saying, outside the Spotify of offers, you may be wondering what this random assortment of things here were: crypto, music, card-linked offers, and data, and how they all fit together. And I'd hope to share you a little bit of context as to how we see them fitting together within this industry. So I wanted to start off the presentation with this quote. You may have seen it. It's gone pretty viral in a New York Times article. In the past, we really needed Facebook. So if the product is free, you are the product. And if you think about it, it's pretty relevant. There's kind of a negative connotation around it. I personally don't necessarily believe there has to be a negative connotation around it, especially with the solutions that we'll be introducing. But it is very relevant if you think about your newsfeed. Every time that you scroll down, an ad pops up that's sucking at least a few seconds out of your life, every day. And if the average lifespan is 30,000 days, we should really think about that. So in general, this is a part of a much larger concept related to the attention economy. The attention economy and the concept behind that was started in the late 90s when computers were becoming more and more prevalent. Now it's like extremely prevalent 25 years later. If you look on any elevator or any bus, you'll see like everyone just spending tons of time on their phone. And digital products essentially are competing for our attention every day. So it's a very relevant conversation, and we think it will be a massive theme over the next decade. So what does the future of data and attention economy look like? Why is right now the right timing for this? And what do we expect to see? So free comes at a cost at most platforms. So as an example with Spotify, there's like an 80-20 rule essentially that's applied. 80% of their revenue really comes from 20% of their users that actually pay for the service. So in 2018, they lost about $450 million off of their free users. So ads just really aren't cutting it anymore, and it's very hard to monetize. It will only get harder as these new data regulations come through with obviously the California Privacy Act, GDPR, and so on and so forth. What we see starting to kind of happen and starting to develop are these like third generation consumer panel companies. So Nielsen kind of took a crack at this like 20 years ago. Things are changing, obviously, with these new data regulations. And we're seeing this paradigm shift for first-party data, opt-in data collection, and I'll kind of explain at least our solution around it and kind of what we expect to see over the next 10 years. So our solution, Current itself, is a reward-based streaming ecosystem, and we compensate anyone for attention and data while consuming content and performing daily habits. I'll kind of go into the product in a few slides, and that'll make a little bit more sense. And I kind of wanted to touch on why content works. So essentially, in one sentence, we pay people to play music is kind of like our tagline when we run ads. There's a lot more to that, but it's a very easy way to keep your CPI down, like the cost per install, which is a big deal for acquiring users. And our retention and engagement stays quite high because we're providing people with something of value and differentiating ourselves. The reason I mention this is that a lot of the companies in this room are either partners of ours or similar to partners of ours. And a lot of content companies, I believe, will kind of make a paradigm shift into integrating with these types of revenue opportunities to further monetize their free audiences. So basically our theory is around monetizing daily habits and data and not subscriptions. So there's not a single subscription within at least our service. And the idea, and these daily habits are things around shopping, microtasks, bill payment, sharing opinions, and obviously engagement within the product that usually has to do with ads. So these reward opportunities, we basically provide users with branded survey panels, affiliate offers, bill reduction opportunities, online cashback, and card-linked services. And we monetize by taking a percentage of all those transactions, collect a ton of data, and obviously also make ad revenue associated with that. And I'll kind of go, as I stated, into the product so that makes a bit more sense. So So we have all these nice little art that my team made, by the way. At the end, you'll see one of me. So who is Current? So a little bit of background on our company. We've raised about $40 million in capital. We're available worldwide, so we don't only take, we don't only work in the U.S. markets. Our card linking, for example, is just in the U.S., but we anticipate to go into other markets and are live in those for our other integrations. We have about 2 million users registered worldwide, going quite rapidly, and our focus is these underserved budget users. So budget users are people that don't pay for subscriptions today. The reason this number is kind of relevant is today there's approximately 4 billion people that own smartphones around the world. About 10% of those people will actually pay for any one media service. So it's actually a very, very large market. And most services, if you think about it, they're always trying to get you to subscribe to a premium service. So there's kind of this subscription fatigue talking about, which the guys at the previous presentation kind of alluded to a little bit as well, around churn and whatnot. And we have a vast number of reward partners within our product, including some of these massive brands. So here's kind of what the product looks like. I'll just kind of go do a quick demo here for you guys. So on the left here, or on the Discover screen, you have 100,000 stations that people can essentially access. While they listen to the music, they can get offline access of that music as well. You have rewarded actions that essentially allow users to earn these points. A lot of these things have to do with the data collection at first. We kind of learn about our users, then we can target our offers to the users. And then there's other features that they can integrate with to earn more points. As a user accumulates points, they can redeem for products, services, cash, and so on and so forth. One unique feature that we have on Android specifically, because it's very hard to generate more than, say, our goal is to provide at least a couple $100s a year for our average engaged user. And as many of you know, it's really hard to do that without the user essentially paying you. And so one of the features that we came up with on Android was actually a lock screen music player. So this is an optional feature, or at least it will be optional. Currently, it's something that everyone, if they're going to use Android, has to do. But our average user opens up their phone every 12 minutes, right? So we built this player that every time someone opens up their phone, it's the first thing they see. And that's about 90 unlocks a day. So if you think about it from an impression standpoint of what we can kind of put for targeted offers and impressions on the phone, and every time they're going to engage with that. And this is one of our most popular and also most profitable features within the product. We also have kind of a bill reduction service where we basically dispute bills, your gas bill, phone bill, whatever for you, and then we take 40% of whatever we save you on the first year. So it kind of works with like property taxes, similar to property tax attorneys, if anyone's familiar with that. But it's very profitable, and you can save people a ton of money. The goal here really is like, we're trying to create a system that allows people to save a meaningful amount of money. And in order for you to do that, you kind of have to tap into all aspects of people's lives and find all these inefficiencies that currently exist. Here's kind of some screenshots of what our card-linked offers programs kind of look like. Empire is one of our partners that we initially launched the service with. And these are kind of like the screenshots where, very similar to a lot of other cashback products that you see maybe around like Dosh or Drop and so on and so forth. Here's kind of our consumer branded research panel. So this is some of the data collection elements that we do. We also we work with a ton of the survey companies and research panel companies, and can basically target specific surveys to our various users. What's interesting about content is that we also get access to users that are traditionally very hard for data companies to get a hold of. So Hispanics, Latinos, Millennial, Gen Z. Our brand is catered to a younger audience. Ironically though, our user base is very split amongst kind of younger users and also kind of like coupon clipping moms and things like that, and also a ton of international users. So it's very interesting to kind of see the demographics as they play out. And then obviously we have affiliate offers and content partners, and we monetize through all of these different integrations within our product. So how does crypto relate to this? I wanted to just touch on this very briefly because Silvio asked me to kind of just give a guidance. I've been through so much crypto nonsense that I'm happy to answer so many questions later if you do actually have a question around it. But I'm just going to give a quick quick 101 on types of digital assets, because there's a ton of negative press in the space. There's a lot of nonsense in the space, but there's also a lot of really interesting stuff in the space as well. So the first part is a security token, which is a type of digital asset, which is actually what we are considered. There's not that many companies that have gone through this space. I'll show you what my legal bill was last year on the next slide. But essentially, like, you are essentially a SEC registered digital security. We have to do public reported financials and so on and so forth. It's very legitimate. It's kind of like an IPO light, which will go through the next stage. The second one is a utility token. So this is where you're seeing a lot of legal scrutiny, a lot of things that the SEC will issue a cease and desist, and there's kind of like this weird line of where this lives within the world today, because when does a network become decentralized? And a lot of people have basically raised a ton of money off of these tokens that virtually don't do anything, and this is where the majority of kind of like negative connotation within the crypto space exists. The third one is just like standardized cryptocurrencies. Probably the ones you're most familiar with are kind of Bitcoin or Ethereum. These things are essentially store of value. I kind of look at them much more similar to like a commodity, even though you can technically build on top of the Ethereum platform. But essentially, that's the one that most people know. And the last one is a stable coin, which is essentially pegged to a currency. So there's very low volatility in a stable coin, and it's essentially the Libra project is what is essentially a proposed stable coin, where it wouldn't just have all these ups and downs as many of the other cryptocurrencies would do. So as stated, the currency token is a fully registered SEC registered security token. We did it via Reg S, Reg D fundraise. We sold it to investors between late 2017 and 2018. We had to spend approximately $1 million in legal fees to do this round. That had to do with doing a full-blown thing with the SEC, and that was a very painful time in my life last year, and started like losing some hair from it, to be honest. It really stinks. And so we had $150 million in interest in our round. We did cap it off at a certain amount. We're the first ever unrestricted B2C digital asset. So as stated, because we chose to do that, going into next year, once we surpass some of the limits that the SEC has set, we'll have to report quarterly financials so that people can make good decisions essentially on their investments. And our partnership is with companies like Open Finance and Securitize, which are the both SEC-approved digital security exchanges and transfer agents. So the space is growing up. There's a lot of really interesting stuff happening to it. I don't personally think it's really going anywhere, because there's a lot of really interesting things that we can more talk about. But I just wanted to kind of touch on this, and happy to talk to you after if you have any questions. So what does the future of Current look like, and also future of the attention economy? So the initial concept of our service wasn't to necessarily build just a music platform. I actually see it much more like a rewards platform, but really mostly a monetization engine. I see this going out through several different other types of platforms. If you think about the amount of users that exist in services like Pandora or Spotify or Tubi or whatever, which is like a free Netflix, there's tons of these services out there, and they all have millions and millions and millions and millions of users. Sometimes it's really hard to acquire users to do things, and these platforms already have a ton of users. And I think that this will also go into other industries as well. And one of the concepts that we've been working on for the past year was to essentially launch basically a hardware device, like a 4G smartphone, where your data intention can actually subsidize your data and voice plan. So that would be an Android-only device. We do have samples of it. I think I actually have a sample in my backpack, to be honest, if you're curious about seeing it. But that's essentially where we're kind of taking our business as we see this concept kind of prove out, which we've seen a lot of really exciting stuff. So partner with us. We have we're looking for more syndicated CLO and cashback content. We also do a ton of different advertising and a lot of direct partnerships for cost per acquisition. A lot of consumer companies work with us to essentially drive our users into their products. And that's my email, and that's my little screenshot, get paid to play. That's it, yeah. So happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
Great to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well.
I suspect that there will be a lot of questions for you. So feel free to, let's make sure the mic is ready. I'm interested in something you said early on, and it was this general sense that with personalization, you want to see the entirety of a person's life. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about what you've learned about the users that you've been engaged with, about the different parts of their life that are relevant to the folks in the room.
Yeah, so let me think about that. I think that the aspect of seeing, well, I mean, the goal is to kind of learn as much as you can about the user. So not only you provide them with the, where you can do some sort of Spotify for offers or kind of just see like what matters to them. But by us seeing kind of like their listening habits, what their moods are, we can kind of collect that type of information and then personalize other things from them, right? So I think that that's relevant to everyone here because it provides you to have the best data set possible. I think Facebook's so powerful because they have that ability to know kind of everything about us. It is creepy, but I think that may or may not be going anywhere, to be honest. So it's just, I think, doing it in like a nice way.
So how'd you get into the work?
Into this platform?
Into the platform, the space. What's your background?
I've always been kind of an online internet entrepreneur. The initial concept actually was that we had built a music platform to focus around free users, had some issues around engagement, and then started thinking more about like, well, what if we started rewarding people for their data and their attention? Initially, we were just going to create our own, kind of internal currency for that. But it was very relevant at the time when these companies were launching cryptocurrencies around it. And the initial actually concept of Current was to actually issue the coin, which actually is a terrible idea because it's the exact reason that there's been so much scrutiny and so much devaluation from the boom in like the late 2017, because essentially what was happening is in late 2017, early 2018, people were just finding out about crypto, and you were seeing on I was on CNBC like 3 times, like people were like, can you speak about ICOs? And so I was like on there explaining it, and people were essentially putting money into this, and it was kind of a disaster because the market was being put up on speculation. But when you issue a coin that is essentially, even if it has a finite supply, you're putting a lot of sell-side pressure on the market, and then the more and more supply that you put out, the price goes down. So we actually are a deflationary cryptocurrency where we buy back our coins off of the market with our revenues and things like that. So we have an entire mechanism for that, because essentially what you get is essentially Venezuela, right? Is what happens when you continue to issue coins, right? You get hyperinflation. So I think Bitcoin works because there is a finite amount, and people essentially tend to hold the asset.
Yeah.
Things like that, so.
Excellent. Well, let's get some questions here. What do we have? And we'll bring the mic to you and your name and your organization.
Hi, I'm Sarah with Gas Buddy. I have a question for you about your acquisition. So where do you find is your most successful source of acquisition compared to those at engagement? So I know in our case, we have different sources of acquisition, but some of those sources end up having higher quality engagement. Do you have?
Yes, 100%. So we basically put our users in different cohorts. Like we do a lot of stuff on influencer, not traditional influencer like Kim Kardashian type influencer. We work with a lot of theme pages on say like Instagram or something, and we'll go after like users like that and get tons of users that essentially want to download and get paid for music. Those users tend to churn more because they're younger, they may not have credit cards and so on and so forth. We're willing to pay more for specific users that fit certain parameters in our user acquisition channels, and we'll pay if a user gets to a certain action within the product. So I think that you have to kind of set specific kind of cohorts within every product, because if I'm going to acquire, say, a user in Brazil, which we are live in and have a very active market in, we might be willing to pay a certain amount because we know that we only have maybe 3 features that they can really monetize there. But at the end of the day, there is a value to every single daily active user, and from a data collection standpoint, going into the next like 3 years of our company, a lot of companies in the data collection space haven't really gone into these international markets, and so we're one of the only players in that. So if we can basically monetize, at a baseline and not like just burn a ton of cash, I think it'll be quite valuable. But yeah, we've essentially just cohort different types of users and different models. So I'm happy to go way into it because I'm a marketer by trade. So happy to.
Yeah. Any other questions? Please don't be shy. This is really a chance to interact, to really unpack what you're hearing here. As I wait for people to warm up, let's make sure that the mic is floating. Yes, sir. Just for those on the other side of the room, the mic is on its way.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jesse. I I serve as an innovation coach for various organizations. And I'm wondering if the people in the room might be interested in hearing what you see. What would you want to offer as tips and recommendations as they move into the C2B space? Because it feels like this is, you're exploring different ways to mature to the C2B model, getting consumers to offer time and attention for monetized returns, and many of the people in this room maybe have not explored that in a formal. The larger the organization, the less likely.
Yeah.
What tips and pitfalls would you want to put in front of their attention?
Yeah. Like the way I think about this is like, if you approach like a Spotify or like a large company that is a consumer company, they are also a very large organization, and it has to be an entire paradigm shift for them to be able to offer these type of rewards for users. I would think more about maybe some of the smaller platforms there are a ton of platforms that are kind of already thinking about this, that have maybe not a user base of like 200 million users, but maybe like 5 or 10 million users. And there are like really easy ways to kind of like engage with those type of platforms to see, is there additional revenue to be had here, and can this become a very large industry? Because I think we're just like in the seed of this right now, and it's just starting. And as it scales up, it will be quite interesting for a lot of these companies, and it will derive a ton of revenue. Because our average user, even right now, that is hyper engaged with our service, earns about $25 to $30 in a given month, right, on our service. So if you think about the example I gave earlier on the 80-20 cutoff for Spotify, they're earning only profitability from the 20% of users that actually pay for Spotify, which everyone in this room is probably would pay for that, because everyone here earns a fair bit of money. But this is not the average audience, right? The average audience does not. And so if you can unlock more than $10 a month from 80% of your audiences, that would be the first, these companies would be $1 trillion companies. So I think that there's a lot more people that are willing to trade their time and attention, especially when they're earning under 20K a year, 30K a year, whatever it might be, and the volume will be very meaningful for your business. So that's how I would think about it.
And you said it's about 3.6 billion users.
So today there's 4 billion people in the world that have smartphones. There's 5 billion people that have any type of phone. The other 1 billion are kind of feature phones. There's 2 billion more people coming online over the next 5 years in kind of like these different economies. But that's a massive number, 4 billion people. But very few as a percentage will actually pay for any sort of media service. And I don't want people to just stay focused on music or anything of that nature. We focus on that because we had a background in that and it made sense, and we knew that was a great retention mechanism, because if you're listening to free Spotify or free Pandora and I'm offering one that pays you, then you're probably going to use my service instead. But that's essentially like where I see this industry going, and the more stuff that you can give people to keep engaging, like that phone idea, like our lifetime value for 18 months on an average phone, and that phone is going to be like $50 and pays you $10, $20 a month, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. So I have a personal question. I have a 12-year-old, and I'm trying to get him to do chores, and he says, "Dad, how much can you pay me?"
Yeah.
So it's a mindset. Help me understand, as somebody who's middle-aged, Gen Xer, about how the user who's coming up is thinking differently about their devices and their relationships with the field. What does it look like? What's the mindset?
The mindset of what I would say to like a parent, like a
Yeah, so my 12-year-old gets it, and obviously I don't.
Yeah.
So help me out.
Well, I don't know how much there is to get. Like, I think like there's, I think it's maybe just not as relevant for some people, just because, as I stated, like this audience it's like not really my target user.
Sure.
I guess the parents have to be cool with their kids using the app, I suppose. And he's 12, so technically 13 is our cutoff. But
can we take that?
Yeah, but in general, like it's something where these apps that these kids are using, whether it be TikTok, which is like the new social network that's like going crazy for those young kids, they're essentially doing data collection on all these things, right? I think that aligning values with your users will be essentially where we're heading as an industry, because essentially like this model aligns values between the platform, the advertisers, and the users, right? And today the model is not aligned. And I think actually like one of my underlying theories as to why Libra is being created and why Facebook's pushing so hard, because if you think about this company is a, call it $800 billion company, whatever it is. Why do they care so much about doing something that's not going to be at least a meaningful impact on the revenue? And I'm talking like 80 billion plus, or it has to be at least 10% of the company. And it's because I think Facebook sees the writing on the wall where they're using people's data to monetize. And if they start having to compensate the user from their underlying shareholders and give that money out, then that's going to deteriorate value of the Facebook stock. Where's that margin going to come from? If you have an association, because Libra is not a part of Facebook, it's an associated entity that would be integrated with it, and you can compensate people from Libra, then now you can continue having your business, have your profits, and then put this other money out there. So that's just my own theory. That's not on the news. There's a lot of rumors around it. But in general, I'm just saying like, this is kind of where we're heading, and it's kind of like a Black Mirror episode if anyone watches that on Netflix. There could be very bad where it's like, at the end of the day, like attention and time is like your most precious asset. And data is an asset just like land is, but attention and data and where you direct it is your most precious asset. And I think that is the commodity that hasn't really been valued, and now it's more relevant because of how we use our devices every day.
Yeah, very, very good. Any additional questions? I'd love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on cryptocurrency, because it could be a mystery for many people in the audience here. But where's the puck going with digital assets in general? Where should people be thinking about in the next maybe 6 to 9 months?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that's happening that's interesting is kind of like the regulatory frameworks that are being developed. As I stated, the major reason why we had to spend so much money on legal is try and be in a space where you don't know what like when you go drive down the road, you know the speed limit, and it's either you break it or you don't. There's a lot of stuff that we've had to do that we're just like, well, hopefully we're not breaking any laws here, and like we have to hire extremely expensive attorneys to kind of give us legal memorandums so that we know that we're not, and so I think that's what's the most interesting thing that's sort of happening is the regulators are kind of waking up to the fact that, hey, here's like a new type of asset, and there's a lot of really interesting things kind of occurring in the space. That there's a lot of decentralization. There's just a lot of like, if you think about like title companies, right? Like, what's the need for necessarily like this one company that I have to pay $5,000 to kind of transfer something that I should be able to transfer anyways? Or if you think about real estate assets, if you can securitize and digitize the shares of that of a building that may be worth $200 million, and you put it into 2 billion little shares that are each worth $1, and it's traded like a security, then it's much easier to kind of like to digitize these massive properties that traditionally have been kind of illiquid and hard to sell. So I think liquidity is the most interesting thing kind of happening in the space, along with the regulatory. And you're seeing so much like momentum on like Bitcoin. Like that's always like Apple and all these companies have added like Bitcoin support to their phones and all this stuff. So I think that the industry is really growing up, and as a I'm diversified into crypto, obviously, because I'm a supporter of it. But there is also a lot of just like negativity and stuff that have like over the last 3 years, because anytime there's new money coming into something, there's always going to be scammers. But that's just the industry growing up,
Yeah.
So
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you, Dan. Any additional questions before we move forward? Yes. I'm going to ask you to wait for the mic if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's always at the back. Hey, Dan, thank you for being so candid about your adventure into crypto and sharing your $1 million legal bill.
Yeah.
A cynical view of that would be, you did that kind of for the vanity, the novelty, the uniqueness of it. What was the benefit of it for the investors and for the company after going through that process?
Yeah, the investors of the company initially, or
yeah, I guess just to be like really blunt, you could look at that and say, wow, that was like a big vanity play on your part to be like, hey, I'm the guy talking about crypto and how I went out with this first time deal. So putting that aside, what ended up being the benefit for the company of going through that process? Well, yeah, so I think there's the benefit. That's a great question. So I think as an entrepreneur, like my personal, like who I was in 2017
drastically changed at say the beginning of 2019, and I think that did for my entire company. At the end of the day, what's really insane, like it was the best and worst thing I could have done, I guess is the best way I can explain it, because at the end of the day, we went from a company that had raised like $3 million in a seed round, which was not trivial to do. It's actually very hard to raise that, especially when you're starting out, with a team of like 5 or 6 people that ended up raising nearly $40 million and in about 6 months. And that is also not a trivial amount of money to do, which comes with a lot of responsibility. And when you go through these, like, my former thought process on things was like, act first, apologize later. But with the federal government, that doesn't work as well. And so essentially, like what ended up happening is we did that, and then found out that we actually had busted aspects of our offering, and which means that we didn't appropriately do the offering how you're supposed to, because these things are not meant for 6 people to do that are just kind of running a startup. And so we actually had to do a rescission, which was one of the largest rescissions of the year last year, because it's just a tremendous amount of money to offer everyone a refund for a period of a month. And then we registered at the SEC, then went through an SEC compliance thing. So on one hand, my initial investors, which guys like Mark Cuban are some of our initial like seed investors and things of that nature, were like really shocked that we were able to kind of like get to that point, and it's put the company in a totally different trajectory of what we can put in terms of resources and execute. Because when you're a young startup, you're young, you're scrappy, you're doing a ton of stuff, but most of the time, cash is a huge issue. We can be all those things, but the cash isn't as much of an issue. And I've bootstrapped all my other previous businesses, so we're just not like a company that just wants to burn cash for no reason. So I think that if you ask my initial investors, like they're very thankful for what we've done, and then but at the same time can recognize like what it's done to us, but it's also matured us a lot as an entity, because you just don't go through SEC investigations casually, and it's also changed our entire compliance. Like I may be the only company ever that had like a 12-person team with a general counsel, and like full time. And so and then for the people that invested in the coin, I think that initially we had to pivot some aspects of the model, because when we wanted to issue those coins, those are essentially restricted securities, and that messed up the entire model. So we had to rethink the entire business, which was very difficult to do while growing a business and dealing with legal stuff and hiring and all the little things that you have to deal with. But the investors now kind of look at the model that we have, and we're one of the first companies to create this deflationary mechanism that essentially kind of removes supply, which essentially, if you think about it, it's no different than a stock buyback and burn, because we burn everything that we buy back. And that's what's going to create value for those initial investors and the dividends. So as our revenues and user bases grow up, the supply of the coins go down. And what's interesting is that we can also have the platform as a company can go public and have a very similar relation to what Facebook would have with Libra. We just did the opposite, where we launched a crypto and then have a private company.
Okay. So I have one last question for you, then we'll give you a chance to take a break. But thank you so much for being honest and candid.
Yeah.
One of the previous speakers talked about it's important for all of us to be together.
Yeah.
And I've seen Silvio over the years build this organization and this ecosystem. What do you want those in the audience to know? What's their role to be able to allow you to reach those individual users who want a different relationship? What do people here need to know? What's exciting about the possibility of being able to do this together?
In terms of like, sorry, the
So you've got processors, you've got merchants, you've got so many radical different pockets in this room.
Yeah.
What does everyone need to know in order to build this space so that in 10 years you come back and everyone sees card linking as the place to be?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I think Sylvia's done a great job in it, because when we joined the association to find card linking partners, like it's not like we were not in the card linking business. Like basically we were trying to extract more value to our users. I was trying to figure out how to do it, then saw all the stuff around card linking. Fortunately had a lot of companies in here that were really interested in what we were doing. And sometimes that's what's challenging, like especially when you're a startup. Right. And even though we have like a decent sized user base, you're kind of, some large companies don't necessarily want to work with like, you know, just like a little shrimpy company. It's been helpful to kind of, you know, get those initial introductions, because I think it's your job as a startup to essentially sell. I mean, look at the guys at Fidel, right? They're a smart company that recently raised $18 million. So I think like these companies grow, and the founders that are like kind of like a younger generation building a startup, you know, these are ultimately going to be the multi-$100 million companies, and we want to do that together, because without the processors, the larger companies, the people that have been in the space for much longer than we have, then, you know, we can't operate either. So we had to kind of go through, and we're trying to adapt our process to essentially integrate with these larger organizations and provide benefit on both ends.
Very good. Well, Dan, it's been a pleasure. You're doing great work, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.